Well, hello, I am David Vos. Great to see everybody today. Well, I want to get right into it. Message today. I think this is going to be very interesting for all of you. I don't think that you're going to find anywhere on YouTube any of this information. I had a lot of my videos. They're controversial. I don't think anybody's going to be too upset by this video, but I do think you're going to find it different, because I just don't see anyone out there really going into these teachings with this perspective, and it fits with everything that I've been telling you about understanding the Bible, about the symbology, about the fact that the literal meaning of the Bible is what keeps us in bondage. Just this idea that we're going to keep all these laws and we're going to be saved, and we never get saved, and it's all this judgment and harsh, wicked hatred and evil and all of this stuff. Well, as you know, Jesus came along and said we need to have love, and he talked about stuff like, hey, you can move mountains. People have wondered, did he really mean that, or is that symbolic? Well, if that's symbolic, then when Jesus said, he healed the blind, and at other times he said the blind would lead the blind into a pit, did he mean spiritually blind? Did Jesus only heal spiritually blind people? Did he only heal spiritually deaf people? Didn't he always say, whoever has an ear to hear, let him hear what I have to say? Because if you cannot, in other words, understand me, if you don't have a spiritual ear to be able to grasp the spiritual meaning of these words, then you're not going to understand anything I'm saying. Jesus said, I always speak in parables, so that the people that are listening will not hear me if they're not ready for the message. Or if they are ready and they're willing to seek and dig deep, they will get the message. See? So there are obviously lots of things in the Bible that are symbolic. Look at the dragon of Revelation. According to that verse, in chapter 12, it says that the dragon is that original serpent. That tells us that original serpent that the book of Genesis talks about wasn't really a serpent. But it could also be a dragon, which in the Greek can be translated into English as monster. Either way, there are no dragons. Now, many of you might say, oh, well, there were dragons in the past. Dragons did exist, and King Arthur killed dragons, and, no, there wasn't any dragons in the days of King Arthur. They are mythological, they're fictitious. You say, well, how do you know that, Dave? Well, it doesn't really matter. There may have been things that look like dragons, but they didn't call them dragons, because this is a word that we use today to describe something mythological, something fictitious. That's a fairy tale thing. Kind of like, the fact that the dragon has 7 heads. The dragon has 10 horns. It's all symbolic. Or the other beasts that come up out of the earth, and it looked like a lamb but spoke like a dragon and had 2 horns. These are simply nightmarish symbols. So just keeping that in mind as we talk today, because I want you to realize here in this video, what we're going to find out is that all of these symbols have a great meaning that was known to all prophets. Whoever wrote a biblical book knew the meanings of all of these symbols, and they used them in conjunction with what others wrote. So, for instance, where in the book of Genesis the writer uses a serpent to represent something evil or something, he uses a tree. There's a tree of life, a tree of knowledge of good and evil. There's animals, there's mountains, there's all kinds of things that are symbolic in Genesis. And it's those things that are used, the same symbols that are used in the book of Revelation. And Jesus himself, it is credited to him that he spoke words about things like mountains. He could move a mountain, or he talked about uprooting a tree. Now, all of you know that trees are hard to uproot. Nowadays you can't do it. you'd break the tree. You can't uproot a tree because the roots are so deep. You see, it represents beliefs. So if you know the meaning of many of these things, the Bible becomes a much more amazing book. Does that mean that there is no literal understanding of the Bible? Does that mean we absolutely cannot move mountains in reality? Only these spiritual mountains? No. I believe that the Bible can be taken in a literal sense throughout. I think you can move a mountain with faith. Today we do this with big tractors and, it could be done through an earthquake. If you really believed hard enough, I suppose an earthquake could come along and level a mountain for you. Anything is possible according to Jesus. Anything. But the primary meaning is the spiritual meaning, because it's not really something we're supposed to be dwelling on. I don't think Jesus intended for people to take his words literally, other than to know that anything's possible. But I don't think he intended for certain Christians to go out, hand in hand around, circle a mountain, and start humming and hoping that the mountain somehow disappears. I don't think that was the intention of what he spoke. He never meant to say that Christians should move mountains. That somehow that's the primary reason for him saying it. That he meant, yes, let's go out there and move some mountains today. Because you see, most people don't care whether there's a mountain. Most time we like mountains. They're good for us. We get streams and rivers from mountains. We get cooler temperatures. There's lots of beautiful things. There's a wonderful habitat. We don't really want to move all these mountains. But what we want to do is remove obstacles in our spiritual path to salvation. So the primary meaning then is spiritual and not necessarily literal, although I don't think that Jesus ever would have uttered anything that would not be literally accurate if one chose to take it that way. But the primary meaning is spiritual. So today we want to talk about, if you read the Bible then, like most people do, primarily literally, and then ever so often, oh, there's a dragon, that's symbolic, that's, we'll figure out what that one symbol means. I think what's happening is a lot of people read the Bible, and they're going along, and they're aware of the fact that when Jesus says, let's uproot trees and throw them in the sea, they're aware that he's speaking metaphorically, perhaps. But I don't think that they're aware that there's actual symbols that go along with each of the things he's speaking of. These are the same exact meanings to the symbols that Moses used, that Isaiah used, that Jeremiah used, Ezekiel, Daniel, and John the Revelator. All of them, and all the other prophets, used, they had a codified symbology. It was codified. They knew exactly what each symbol meant. Now, how did they understand this? Well, notice that the Apostle Paul says that he got a vision about paradise. And this is one of the things that he said proved that he was an apostle, basically, because he was able to understand the mysteries. What are these mysteries that Paul was able to understand and therefore qualified to teach? Well, he spoke about paradise. You see, all of the prophets, no matter who they ever were, if you look at Isaiah, he talks about the original garden, trees. He's always talking about these trees and little branches and sprouts and mountains and kingdoms, which represented mountains, and horns and animals and these things. Well, notice that all of this represents things you would find on the earth, natural things. Notice they never use computers or hammers. It's always this garden scenario. And it all goes back to the original story in Genesis. And so each of the prophets who became prophets was learned in the knowledge of symbols. And it's not like they could just make up something, like, oh, I'm a prophet, I can talk about trees, and in my prophecy, trees mean circumstances. But in Joe's prophecy, trees mean, big events that come along in life or something of that nature. But no, these prophecies all intertwine like a glove, as if it was all written. Remember now, the first prophecy in Genesis was written a long time before the last prophecy in the book of Revelation. Probably 2,000 years apart or more. And because I'm assuming that the Genesis account, even by normal Christian standards, was handed down from Abraham. And of course, Abraham lived 2000 BC. So that's about 3,000 years ago. However, when you do some research, you find out that there were older manuscripts than the ones that we have that originally incorporated this information of this garden, the flood. The flood story is in the Egyptian documents. It's in the Sumerian tablets, in the Babylonian tablets, the Ugaritic, the Akkadian tablets. This story is basically worldwide. And the Sumerian tablets are much older, and they give a credible witness to the fact that these stories were handed down for many, many thousands and thousands of years. The Sumerian tablets tell of a story about how Alalu came to the earth like a spaceman. When he landed on the earth in this, swamp, he got out, and the first thing he noticed was this serpent that was in this environment on the earth like a paradise. So he wondered about the serpent, and that's about as far as it goes at that moment. But you see, it was from these early writings that these symbols began to become incorporated into the story. Now, a lot of people today, just like they do with the Bible, will read the Sumerian tablets and they'll say, oh, that's curious. He found a serpent. Oh, well, let's move on. He said in the Sumerian tablets there that he didn't have serpents on his planet, Nibiru. Well, that's really, of course, Nibiru, as many of you know if you're watching my videos, I believe is a planet that goes around the planet Sirius and comes near proximity to Earth every 3,600 years. So what he was really saying there is very symbolic. It seems like he's telling a very perfectly and logical story, a literal story of how he came to this earth and got out of his little capsule and landed in some water. And he happened to notice a serpent. But you see, there's a reason that the Sumerian tablets mention the serpent. And what I'm getting at is that these symbols are very, very old. And the ancient writers appears to have understood and had some code that they wrote in. You say, well, that's impossible, Dave. Well, it may seem like it would be impossible that peoples in different cultures and different nations, and yet the same symbols keep popping up, whether it's in the Bible or in the Babylonian texts. I mean, in that particular passage, he's obviously saying that this serpent represented some kind of evil or innocence or this undeveloped nature, the lower nature, the carnal lower nature. And he made the point to say they didn't have snakes on Nibiru. So what he was really saying is that this lower carnal nature did no longer exist on Nibiru, but he had found a planet with the base core carnal nature that he was looking for. Perhaps he didn't even, expect it. Maybe he wasn't even looking for it. So in every nation and in every kingdom, with every prophet and every religion, there is this coded language. Now, it doesn't seem very extraordinary to me because I believe that what we're talking about is the root of language that we have now only shreds and pieces of. I think that the original language, and most of you know, was pictograph. And I don't think that was the original language, friends. I think the original language was literally images in your mind. And perhaps that grew from images and telepathic imagery to trying to put those images in your mind into certain little pictures, and that was the pictograph. And it went from the pictograph to little signs and symbols. The Phoenicians are the ones that started making these, less crude, we think, but perhaps even, we think they got more advanced because we got letters like A, B, C, right? Alpha, beta, aleph, beth, in different languages. It's basically all from the same root. And we're like, oh, we're advancing now. Now we've got letters. We've got language. No, we're not advancing. What's actually happening is what happened there at the Tower of Babel. They began to confuse the languages of earth so that all the peoples of the earth would begin to misunderstand each other. Because you see, now we're not seeing eye to eye. We're not seeing the symbols, and we don't know the meaning of the symbols. We've lost the meaning of the Bible. We've lost the meaning of the ancient texts. And we've got people out there running around saying, well, I've interpreted it. I've translated it. Well, that's all you're doing, friends, is translating it into a little scribble, right? This isn't, not only is it not accurate because it's one language of scribble to another language of scribble, but these scribblings used to be pictures. And pictures used to be telepathic imagery that you could not mistake. The original language of Adam and Eve was not little scribbles on a page. So what's happened is that this God, these evil Anunnaki, these deities that I've exposed in many of my videos as Jehovah, the one who wrote these laws of slavery and all of these laws of genocide and war and bondage, they came to rule over us and to imprison us, and they took our ability to see and understand away from us. We no longer have the ability to comprehend basic symbols, which was natural, which came to us naturally. People didn't even have to learn a language at one time. We all knew how to communicate telepathically. Perhaps it took a few moments or a few weeks. Like a child learns to walk today. It may take him a few months to learn, perhaps a year. But he learns naturally to walk, and all children, if they're healthy, learn how to walk. Perhaps this is the way it was in the beginning. Every child that was born began to communicate without learning, without being told how to communicate, because you see, images are universal. And trees and mountains and flowers and various things like water and heavens, all of these things are images in your mind. There isn't any way to be deceptive. You see, lies began from the moment we were able to lie. From the moment we could hide within ourselves and write scribbles on a page, that's the moment that we were able to lie to one another. And confusion began to set in. And this nation had this scribbles, and this nation had this scribbles, and the other nation had another scribble, and they didn't understand one another any longer. You see, the Bible tells us this happened about 4,000 years ago. And perhaps that's true. But I think it began to happen even thousands of years before that. But that's barely accurate. We know that the Phoenicians began to codify the languages from the pictographs, from the imagery, into these little simple letters about that time. Now before that, there was pictographs, but I don't think pictographs existed for a long period of time. I think that was more or less a transitionary way of understanding. Before that, you see, there were simply people that telepathically communicated and a world of love. Now the prophets, they were taught in the temples and in the monasteries to try to remember this ancient wisdom. That's all that was happening. That's why we have these organizations and these temples, and originally monasteries were good, and the secret mysteries were handed down. And I think that's where we get the word, the laying on of hands. See, the problem is, a lot of people wonder, well, the apostles taught the laying on of hands. So today, if you have a church, and it's a true church, it's going to have this laying on of hands thing. Well, friends, here's the reason why you can't use laying on of hands anymore. You don't have anything to give anyone. You have nothing in your hands. So how are you going to hand on to someone else something you don't have. It has been lost, and you have no right to hand something on to your beneficiary that you do not own, possess, or even know about. So you have lost the ancient wisdom, and you cannot hand this on. In this video, I intend to show you what the original language was. And if you know what that original language was, then you can understand the Bible, friends, for the first time in your life. And when you understand the Bible, friends, here's what happens. You're free. You say, well, how's that, Dave? Oh, this is amazing, friends. Buckle up. Put your helmet on, because all of a sudden you're going to get a hold of something that it's like, getting in a daddy's car, right? And it goes 150 miles an hour, and you just learned how to drive. Okay, this is going to be wonderful, and you're so excited, and you're ready to just rumble. But you got to take this a little bit slow. Be a little patient, because this knowledge will just completely transform who you are. Why? Because the only way to have knowledge is through the accurate way of presenting knowledge. For instance, just take the Bible. You can't understand the Bible if you don't know the meaning of it. And in fact, you cannot even communicate with others unless they can understand your language. See, Christianity had a lot to do with language. Remember, in the very beginning, when they became Christians, they received the ability to speak in another tongue. Now, what do you suppose that tongue was? A tongue that everyone could understand, no matter what their nationality. Well, friends, I believe that they were able to communicate in symbols in the original language. And this is the original language of Adam. And when you learn this knowledge, when you find this out, not only are you going to be able to understand the Bible, but you're going to be able to communicate with your dream world, with your inner self, with the angels, with the Divine Father. Because you see, the Holy Spirit speaks to us all the time. The reason why most of us never hear the Holy Spirit is because we are cut off from the Holy Spirit by ignorance, by this outer consciousness. We're too all wrapped up in all these little scribbles. Oh, I don't understand. There's scribbles. And our brain is, like jelly. It's scrambled. We can't make heads nor tails of it. Because, you see, the pure vision does not come to us. You've got to have a vision to really know. And this is another thing that people don't understand. What is a vision? They say, oh, I had a vision, right? Most of you just had a dream. And you don't understand it. But dreams are close to visions, but dreams are definitely symbols that you receive when you wake up. But do you know that when you were sleeping, you were doing something very powerful, that you were living something very amazing, and that when you wake up, you immediately go into this conscious world, and your conscious mind scrambles for words to describe it, and so it brings back these little symbols. And yes, friends, these are universal symbols. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to interpret the dream. That's why prophets were learned men who were able to interpret the dream. Why? Because they were taught these universal symbols. That is the universal language that goes back to the original language, which is telepathic, which is thought forms. Okay, so Genesis talks about trees and mountains and animals and water and sunlight and everything. And this is exactly what Jesus talked about, friends. Remember, he talked about trees being uprooted and mountains being, thrown into the sea. He talked about the sea and the waves of the sea. Remember, those who are caught up in every wind of doctrine. So he says that the wind is certain doctrines, and it blows upon the sea and troubles the sea. And if one really gets to looking at that, one can imagine there that the waves are these emotions. And in fact, that's what they are. And then we can take that and we can go and we can see where Jesus was asleep in the boat. And we notice that, the waves rose and the wind was blowing and the boat was a-rocking. And the disciples were scared out of their mind. And Jesus was sleeping in the boat. And I've said this many times, and I use this a lot because I think it's a very simple and revealing understanding. Very important that we understand this. But that Jesus there, being asleep in the boat, represents the inner spiritual man. The spiritual person within you. The Christ child. And the boat is the body. And you notice that our life is floating on this sea. You ever heard of the Sea of Tranquility? Well, that's what we need. But they're not. They're floating in this troubled sea. And the sea is troubled because of all these winds. What are the winds of doctrine or teachings, ideas, fears? This is just blowing on our emotional being, and we're troubled. But you see, inside our boat, we've got the inner spiritual man. Now, this is just a little example of how the Bible works. And I want to explain many of the biblical symbols. But more importantly, friends, we can do that all day, and I've done this many times in many of my videos. We've talked about some of the symbols, and we can crack these open, and we can learn so many things. But friends, I want you to be able to understand these things for yourself. So what you need to do is learn what the symbols mean, so that when you read the Bible, you understand it. But not just the Bible, friends, because remember, Jesus said, you don't need anybody to teach you, because you see, the Holy Spirit is going to come, and He will teach you all things. Whatsoever you need to know, He's going to be there with you. He's going to be a comforter. And you see, what in the world, in this universe, could it be that would come to us and teach us all things? What is this Holy Spirit? This is a flow. It's a flowing. It's a river. It's a river of life. It's a channel of spirit. And what is spirit? It is mind. It is thoughts. It is the will. And when you have inside your mind the correct ability to open up your mind and understand the original language, you will be able to communicate with angels and with your inner spiritual self, that Christ that's in the boat. When He wakes up, He's going to calm that sea, and He's going to move that mountain, and He's going to uproot those beliefs, those poisonous fruits that are killing you, and your life is going to be amazing, friends. All right, I'm going to stop there, and we're going to continue this. It's going to be a series. So, friends, pick it up here in the next video, and we're going to get into this, and it's going to be great, friends. This is going to be eye-opening. It's going to be amazing. This is David Vos, and I'll catch you in the next video.